source of life and cause of death. Water can wash away clues, dilute evidence, and conceal corpses. For investigators, water can be a cunning opponent. For criminals, a most accommodating ally. For the perfect crime, just add water. This story unfolds on the Mississippi River that runs through the heart of Carlton Place, Ontario. It's a bedroom community for Ottawa, the country's capital city. It's a small town with a population of barely 5,000. Almost everybody knows each other, and no one suspects that there might be a murderer living among them. On November 10th, 1994, at 9:03 p.m., Constable Jim Birch is dispatched to the scene of an accident. A truck is overturned near a one-lane bridge that passes over the river just minutes away from police headquarters.
When I first arrived, there was a car just near the bridge, and a person whom I recognized as being Gary Samuels was in the car. He was hunched over, he had a coat over his shoulders, and there was also a young lady who was driving the car at the time. When I spoke to Gary and asked him what had happened, he said Barb is still in the truck.
Barbara Lanthier and Gary Samuels are married. A passerby is already standing on the overturned truck in the river, trying to help.
And I recognized the person as Glenn Pierce, standing on the undercarriage of the truck, and he had a flashlight. I went down to the water's edge, and by that time, Mr. Pierce had opened the truck door, and I asked him to shine his flashlight inside. I could see Barb's body inside the truck, floating face down. I would have went in the driver's door and stepped across. She was on the passenger side, as the vehicle was upside down, and floated out the driver's door towards the bank.
Barbara Lanthier is unconscious. Constable Birch knows he must act quickly.
It would only be 2 minutes in the water, 2 to 3 minutes at most, and back to the water's rock ledge, where we did CPR until the emergency vans arrived. She was taken away at that time, so the total time would have been approximately 10 minutes.
Gary Samuels, the victim's husband, is taken to the hospital in another vehicle. After the brief rescue in the icy waters, Birch is shivering from the cold. Dave McDonald is the investigator in charge of the case.
I estimate 3 to 4 minutes of him actually entering the river, pulling her out, and then moving up, 3 meters up the cliff. He was telling me he was completely expended, and he fell to the grass because his legs wouldn't support him anymore because they had gone completely numb from the cold. He said then he just collapsed.
Constable Birch realizes that he is showing the symptoms of hypothermia. He knows there is little time to counteract the effects.
I took the cruiser, went home, changed my clothes, and at the same time drew a hot bath to try to get my body temperature up because I was shaking.
Medical staff at the hospital is trying to resuscitate Barbara Lanthier.
They have an expression in the medical community, you're not dead till you're warm and dead. So anyone who's been exposed to excessive cold, whether it be water or snow, if they come in and their vital signs absent, they continue to attempt CPR until the core temperature comes back up. And so they worked for a fair bit of time on Barb.
Jim Birch arrives at the hospital as the accident comes to its sad conclusion.
I met Dr. White, who was the attending physician. He explained to me that he had pronounced Barb Lanthier dead and that Gary Samuels was in a room across the hall. I asked permission to speak with him.
Jim Birch, Gary Samuels, and Barbara Lanthier are all part of the same social network.
I'd been with him at a social gathering. He was always quite jovial. But in this instance, it didn't seem out of character that he would be quite sullen. He had just been told by Dr. White that his wife was deceased, but he was quite coherent. I gave my condolences to Gary, and he started to explain to me what he had done prior to the accident. I wrote down the story word for word, directly in front of Gary.
Gary Samuels tells the officer that he picked up his wife when she was closing her business that night at 7:20 p.m.
Barbara was a hairdresser. She worked at a business called the Clip Joint on Bridge Street, a corner of Bridge and Allen Street, right in the center of the small downtown core of Carlton Place.
They were going to meet another couple in Carlton Place and then go to their dinner reservation. He said that they drove down Mill Street under the train tunnel bridge and towards the back bridges of the Mississippi River. He said that there was a truck or possibly a car making a wide turn. The vehicle didn't have headlights on, and he swerved to the left. He said that Barb screamed when they swerved. They went over a short piece of grassy area to the rock ledge. Then the truck tipped over into the water, and when it did, it filled up quickly with water. He realized he was upside down, and he was able to get his weight off the seatbelt. Then he was able to orient himself as to which way was up and found an airspace in the truck. He said that he was in there a long time. He said that eventually he noticed that the driver's window was partly open. So he opened it the rest of the way, and he attempted to take Barb out of the truck with him, but she got caught on something, and he decided that there was no sense in both of them dying, so he escaped himself. He crawled up the riverbank. There was one car went by, and then the next vehicle stopped. And we arrived shortly after that.
And then out of the blue, he says, but Barb and I hadn't had a harsh word in years. He said she must have been scared. She doesn't swim. She only swims once a year. And we haven't had a harsh word in years. Jim at no point was suggesting anything, any kind of conflict between the two, but he seemed to feel it was important to add that.
Told me that he had picked Barb up at approximately 20 after 7, and the call came in at 9:03. It was approximately 90 minutes that he would have been in the water.
Constable Birch notes Samuel's condition after his long immersion in the icy waters.
He did ask the nurse at one point to cover his feet. However, I did notice that the sheet was not over his shoulders, that his upper body didn't appear to be cold or shaking.
Before leaving the hospital, Jim Birch asked the head nurse for some additional information about Samuels.
He complained of a headache, and one of the nurses said to me that when he was complaining of a headache, we bagged his clothing.
It appears that there was a strong smell of gasoline on his clothes.
And then I asked the people who worked on Barbara Lanthier, did her clothing smell of gasoline? And they said no. So that was interesting because Gary Samuels' version of events was they had both been exposed to the same event in the water for essentially the same length of time.
When Jim Birch leaves the hospital, he decides to gather a few key pieces of evidence from the accident scene.
Now, when he ended up back at the police station, he grabbed a thermometer out of the breath room and stuck it in the water and got the temperature of the water. We also had the air temperature that night. So we had water at 2 degrees Celsius, I believe, and the air temperature at 4 degrees Celsius. And good on Jim Birch. That's not something I would have thought to do.
Constable McDonald didn't attend the accident the previous night. He visits the scene with Constable Birch, and their findings leave him puzzled.
The most alarming thing I heard was the description from Gary Samuels that involves sudden movements of the truck on the asphalt surface and then over the grass. I mean, the first question that comes to mind is, why didn't you just put the brakes on? I knew that he couldn't have been going fast. You can't go fast there. I'm thinking, there's a lot of questions here need to be asked.
Princess Street and Mill Street converge on the small, single-lane bridge where the accident occurred.
The back bridges are two bridges, one onto an island, one off. And you approach that first bridge from two streets, Mill and Princess. As you approach them, you have to go at an angle through a very old single-lane stone train trestle. So local drivers fully understand, A, you gotta slow down and toot your horn or flash your lights at the train trestle, and you're not going any more than 5 or 10 kilometers an hour. You're gonna take your mirrors off. Once you get through there, you gotta watch for Princess Street because there could be somebody coming at the same speed approaching that single-lane bridge. So it's a virtually low-speed area. And it's not the kind of place where you would expect anyone would ever have enough speed to go off the roadway into the water.
Dave McDonald is one of the only investigators to raise any questions about the circumstances surrounding the accident.
I mistakenly thought at the very beginning, before I spoke to Jim Birch, that there had been impact, that somebody had come and hit him and he went off into the river. But then I find out there's no actual contact. So second is brake marks. There should be some brake marks. And in the absence of brake marks, if for some reason you don't brake, but you suddenly change direction, you're gonna leave marks on the road. If you drive along in your car and suddenly yank the wheel one way or another, and the rubber tires turn suddenly, you're gonna leave something on the pavement. There has to be some mark there.
Unfortunately, Gary Samuel's vehicle has already been towed from the scene before being properly examined.
Because there was no suspected foul play the first night, we didn't secure the scene the way you would normally secure a scene. So once we started to have concerns and they got significant enough, we sealed the scene at that point.
Based on his expertise as a former mechanic, Dave McDonald continues to look for clues that he feels are missing from the scene of this accident.
Well, you could clearly see where his vehicle had gone off, and you could just see where it went across, and you could see where it clunked on the way over. But all you saw was 2 marks. So when you turn your front wheels to the left, if you go off of one surface onto another, what you get is 2 sets of marks where your vehicle's turned on, and you get 2 more sets from your rear tires, because they will not follow exactly behind your front tires. They'll track a little inside of them. But initially in the turning, you should have had 4 marks go over there, not 2. Based on the geography of the scene and the description he provided, things couldn't have happened the way he said they happened.
Dave McDonald shares his doubts with Jim Birch and their superiors at the Carlton Place Police.
Quite frankly, I was making a number of people uncomfortable with all of the questions in the early going. And they were all still experiencing the tragedy of Barb's death. And I was stirring the pot in terms of asking a lot of questions.
Then Dave McDonald receives a surprising call from the funeral home where Barbara Lanthier's body is being held.
Gary Samuels said it was Barbara Lanthier's wish to be cremated, and he wanted the cremation to happen that day. I was uneasy about some things, but the fact that he wanted to cremate her instantly, without even the attendance of her children, was a huge red flag to me.
Is it possible that Barbara Lanthier's death is not the result of a car accident? Are Dave McDonald's doubts justifiable? Can he succeed in convincing the coroner that an autopsy on Mrs. Lanthier is necessary? In November 1994, a truck is found overturned in the Mississippi River in Carlton Place, Ontario. One of the passengers, Barbara Lanthier, is pronounced dead. The other passenger, her husband Gary Samuels, survives. The following day, investigator Dave McDonald begins to have doubts about Samuel's story. That same day, police learn that Samuels wants to proceed with the immediate cremation of his wife. McDonald contacts the coroner to stop the procedure.
I'm not comfortable with the way he described the event. I'm not comfortable that we can't find the things I think should be at the scene. And the sudden cremation of his body before we have a chance to answer these questions is not okay, in my opinion. And I don't yet have enough, the way our system works, to suggest that a criminal charge is going to be laid. We're sort of way before that yet. But with your authority as a coroner, you can give me a warrant to have a post-mortem conducted on that body.
The coroner accepts Dave McDonald's arguments and orders an autopsy. Now McDonald and Birch have to inform Gary Samuels about the decision. Constable McDonald hears from the funeral director about the strange condition of Barbara Lanthier's body when he first received it after the accident.
Dean Adaman was funeral director at the time. It's his business to deal with the injury and so on to bodies. He said, look at her. She looks like she's been in a bar fight.
Dave McDonald tries to understand how these injuries could occur during a car accident.
I mean, she had a broken nose. She was lacerated up. She had interesting injuries. She had them at the top of her head, a significant impact to the front of her face, and significant impact under her jaw. And that's one of the things I'm thinking to myself. If we're dealing with a single impact event, and we know that the truck was actually going so slowly over that cliff edge, and you would think the instinctive reaction is to put your hands up or do something to protect your face. And incidentally, she had no injuries to her wrists, hands, elbows, shoulders, so there's no impact injuries to her in that way. And she did nothing to stop her face from smacking into either the dash or the windshield. Even supposing, extraordinarily, that the front of your face and the top of your face hits two different objects at the same time with impact, how do you get the damage underneath? In my opinion, there's more than one thing has to happen to create the amount of damage that was done to her. How does all of that happen when there's only one clunk? One of the funeral home employees showed us to a small office, and his back is to us. He turns, says hello to Jim, and he looks at me, and he had 3 marks down the front of his face, from his cheekbone to his jawline. And I remember I was shocked, because to me, it looked like someone had grabbed and scratched at his face. And I'll never, ever forget that visit.
Gary Samuels shows no emotion when Dave McDonald tells him that an autopsy has been ordered.
When we got out of the funeral home, I looked at Jim and I said, oh my God, did you see his face? You know, what other explanation is there for that?
Constable McDonald takes his growing list of unanswered questions to his superiors. They give him 2 weeks to demonstrate that there is a crime behind the accident and that a criminal investigation is required. Dave McDonald then speaks with the witnesses who helped Samuels the night of the alleged accident.
When they stopped to speak to him, the first thing he did was describe the events that caused them to go over the edge of the cliff. What he said was, I was with Barb, we're driving along, and a car with no lights on came at me from the right, and I had to swerve. I went over the edge and went into the water, and Barb's in the truck. You got to get Barb out. And of course, when I heard that from the witnesses, and they were both clear on that immediately kind of set off a flag. Like, my goodness, you'd think that the first thing you'd be saying is, get my wife out, as opposed to, let me explain why I went in. So that struck me as strange.
The way Samuels described his escape from the overturned vehicle raises questions in McDonald's mind.
Given the amount of time that he was in there, if he could touch the door, he could reach and find the door handle, especially once you've had enough time to orient yourself to sort of where you are and what's happening. And if by pulling the door handle, the door popped open, and that's what happened for Glenn Pierce, it would certainly be easier. When you imagine to swim out the window in darkness entails taking a breath, submerging yourself in water where you can't see, and it's rapidly moving water once you get your head out that window, because the truck's now upside down. So you're effectively pinning yourself down there. Then you got to get yourself through that window opening and then stand up. It would be scary at the least, if not extremely difficult to do physically, I would think, when you had the option of just pulling the door handle.
The autopsy of Barbara Lanthier is carried out at Ottawa General Hospital on November 12, 1994, 2 days after her death.
Pathologists considered the circumstances, i.e. she's found in an overturned truck in the river. Pulled out and resuscitation attempts were unsuccessful. He noted the damage to her face. He told us she had what he referred to as a hangman's fracture. So the C1 and C2 vertebrae just at the base of your skull. It got the nickname hangman fracture years ago when capital punishment was hanging, and when the bodies dropped, the sudden dramatic force would snap the very top C1, C2 vertebra. So initially we did some work trying to understand what in this sequence of events could have caused that hangman's fracture.
Barbara Lanthier's body is returned to the funeral home in Carlton Place to be prepared for cremation. Fingernail scrapings are taken from her at that time.
Fingernail scrapings are generally taken in a case when you want to try and determine if she was trying to defend herself in any way and perhaps might have scratched the other person and got skin cells or DNA under her fingernails. And as it turned out in this case, we were supplied with a photograph of Mr. Samuels that showed distinct scratches down the right side of his face that potentially could have been from fingernails, from being scratched by someone.
After the accident, Gary Samuels' Ford truck is towed in for a forensic exam. Constable Dan McIver is responsible for gathering evidence. McIver must first determine that the truck systems are all functioning properly.
I had a mechanic from Ministry of Transport for Ontario come in and do an examination of the vehicle to check the brakes and the underside of the vehicle to ensure that everything was working properly, and it was. Everything was fine.
McIver also conducts an inventory of the vehicle, noting every detail as he goes. He starts with the interior.
I would photograph it and record any of the damage that was done to it in the way of scratches, dents, the windshield being broken, that sort of thing. I examined the inside of the vehicle just to determine how the knobs were set, whether the ignition was on at the time, whether the vehicle's in park, reverse, that sort of thing.
While he is examining the exterior, he sees a detail that went unnoticed until now.
One of the other examinations that I did was to check the gas tank. The gas tank cap, when I looked at it, looked like it was sitting in a kind of a strange position. So on further examination of it, I was able to determine that it wasn't actually fitting on properly. So it was obvious when I examined it that in putting that gas cap on the last time, it wasn't fastened securely and was actually left open in a way that gas would be able to flow out of it if it were turned upside down.
Constable McIver learns that Gary Samuels' clothing smelled of gasoline the night of the accident.
This became interesting in the investigation when I was advised that Mr. Samuels' clothing was soaked in gasoline. The smell of gas was so strong at the hospital that they had to bag his clothing.
Dave McDonald examines the sequence of events and the evidence gathered to date. It raises a serious question about how long Samuel says he was immersed in the river.
In total, Jim Birch was wet and cold for about 3 minutes before he collapsed. And I mean, as the investigation progressed, the fact that Gary Samuels suggesting he spent, between an hour and 90 minutes exposed to that kind of water and was functionally able to do a whole series of things. And we had the observations of the witnesses at the scene and then the nursing staff at the hospital, which was literally 8 or 9 blocks away. describing him being able to talk, move, and so on and so forth, it seemed way out of proportion to the experience Jim Birch had.
To answer his questions, MacDonald calls on a hypothermia specialist, Dr. Giesbrecht from the University of Manitoba.
We contacted Dr. Giesbrecht, and he said, well, what we can do for you is we'll try to recreate that sequence of events, but we'll monitor the person that we have do this. So they built a big tank, like I'm talking maybe 10 feet by 8 feet, and it was chest high. They filled it with water and ice.
Jim Birch receives a surprising call just 2 days before the deadline to prove this is a criminal case.
I received a telephone call from Kevin Lanthier, who was Barb Lanthier's biological son. And he told me that he found a briefcase in a closet, and that the briefcase contained credit cards and insurance policies.
There was a handwritten note at the top of the insurance documents, and the note said, if Barb and I both go, look for 2.2 mil.
Dave MacDonald reports to his superiors. He believes Barbara Lanthier's death is a murder disguised as an accident that is motivated by insurance fraud. Will the results from the hypothermia experiment prove that Gary Samuels lied about the time he spent in the icy waters? Can the purchase of multiple insurance policies prove that Gary Samuels was planning to kill his wife to collect the money? The accidental death of Barbara Lanthier is becoming a homicide investigation. Investigators are finding evidence that could prove her husband, Gary Samuels, was not telling the truth about their car accident. The police discover that Gary Samuels had taken out multiple insurance policies on his wife's life, worth more than $2 million. Dave MacDonald analyzes the insurance policies and finds an interesting similarity between them.
Now, this is not just life insurance, but accidental death insurance and mortgage insurance. In total, I think there were 27 policies. At that time, in 1994, the industry standard was $150,000. So if a person died and their policy was $150,000 or less, what the insurance company required in order to effect a payout was a newspaper clipping saying the person had died and a death certificate from the coroner. So if you had both of those things, they'd pay you $150,000. Really no questions asked. Well, Gary Samuels purchased policy after policy after policy at $150,000 or less from different companies.
The Carlton Place police don't have the resources to handle a homicide investigation, so they request assistance from the Ontario Provincial Police. The team decides that Jim Birch should no longer work on the case due to his relationship with Lanthier and Samuels. Forensic identification technician Dan McIver is interested in the fact that Gary Samuels' clothing smelled of gasoline. He devises an experiment to better understand what happened.
Mr. Samuels had indicated he was inside the vehicle for an hour and a half. However, his clothing smelled very strongly of gasoline, and there was no indication of any gasoline or gasoline smell on Miss Lanthier's clothes. So one of the tests that we wanted to try and do was to determine how long it would take that gasoline to run out of the tank when it was upside down and with the nozzle just slightly under the water. So an experiment was done in which we allowed the gasoline to drain out of the tank. And the time that it took for that gasoline to drain out was about 6 minutes. Actually, the drain nozzle is on the driver's side of Mr. Samuel's vehicle. So that would indicate to me that Mr. Samuel would have to have gotten out, and he did indicate he left through the driver's side window, I believe. He would have to have gotten out of that vehicle within the 6 to 8 minutes that it took for that gas tank to drain, and certainly not an hour and a half.
The investigators find a witness who saw Gary Samuels at his home the night of the accident.
A neighbor saw them there at 7:30, and he was able to place them there based on a television program. He watched the television program until 7:30, and he got in his truck 8 doors away and drove down past. He saw Gary's truck. He was able to tell us how it was angled, that it was running, that the lights were on. Gary was walking away from the truck into the house, and Jim was clear on all of that, and he was clear on the time. So I don't think Gary went directly from the clip joint to the water. I think he went back to their residence at Lakeshore Drive.
The neighbor's statement opens up a theory that Samuels may have murdered Barbara Lanthier in their home. Investigators speculate that Samuels stopped at home to let Barbara prepare for a dinner engagement with friends. As she walked into the house, Samuels attacked her and forcibly held her face down in the hot tub until she drowned. This could explain the bruising that Lanthier sustained that was not consistent with a car accident. Then Samuels could have put Barbara's body into the truck, drove to the bridge, and staged the accident a short time later. Dave McDonald receives the results from Dr. Giesbrecht's hypothermia experiment. Normal body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius. A person becomes hypothermic when their core temperature falls below 35 degrees Celsius. In a state of moderate hypothermia, there is difficulty walking and talking. The body shakes uncontrollably, and the extremities, fingers and toes, will turn blue. Below 30 degrees Celsius, the main organs stop functioning and death will occur.
So Perry just gets colder and colder and colder. So as Perry gets to the point where he's been in almost 90 minutes, he's shivering. I've never seen anything like this. Perry's shivering were entire body convulsions, like jerking, spasming convulsions. So they're trying to ask him questions to see if he can speak. And he'll say a word or two, and then his entire body seizes up with shiver spasm. We compared Perry's ability to that of Gary Samuels, who was talking to the nurses, providing a full statement to Jim Birch, complaining of a headache. To my mind, clearly, Gary Samuels did not spend 90 minutes submerged in 4-degree water. There's no way in the world he was in that water for that long.
Would the hypothermia experiment be proof enough to convince a jury? If Samuels could not survive 90 minutes in the water, then where was he? Could he have been at home murdering his wife? In November 1994, the accidental death of Barbara Lanthier becomes a criminal investigation. Hypothermic testing reveals that it is nearly impossible for Samuels to have been in the frigid waters of the Mississippi for 90 minutes. A neighbor tells police that he saw Gary Samuels and his truck at their home at the same time that Samuels claimed to be trapped in the river. Investigators obtain a warrant to search Samuels' home.
We were also interested in the chemicals that were in the house because they have a hot tub, and one of our thoughts was perhaps that death may have occurred within the hot tub. So we wanted to have those chemicals to check with some of the biological exhibits that we did receive from the autopsy on Ms. Lanthier. I had done a water sample from what was left in the hot tub. I had also observed some brownish stainings in the spa room on the steps. Those were all checked with a hemostic, which would turn to a specific color if they were blood, and they all turned out to be negative.
The search of Samuels' house yields no direct evidence. Investigators obtain a search warrant for his lawyer's office.
We found a number of things of great interest there. One, we found was his Province of Ontario life insurance sales license. He was a licensed life insurance sales person. So he absolutely understood how to acquire it at a level where there would be no investigation. And he also understood, like we discovered, there is no central registry for insurance in the province of Ontario. I can't dial a number and say, can you check Gary Samuels and tell me how much life insurance he has and what company he's with? There was no central data bank or registry for that.
Investigators discover how Gary Samuels paid for 27 insurance policies.
He acquired numerous credit cards, and he began to have the monthly premium for each of these insurances billed directly to his credit card. And then he insured the life of himself and his spouse on each credit card. As that debt mounted, he had no concerns about ever having to pay it off. Because the minute Barb Lanthier died accidentally, those policy premiums would be completely wiped out because the credit cards were all covered for her death. And the credit card companies ask no questions. Doesn't matter how you die, as long as you are dead, they will pay off the balance. They'll just wipe out the balance. I'd never seen anything like it.
Dave McDonald discovers that Samuels frequently purchased travel insurance. He visits the agency to ask a few questions.
I stopped in and said, "Hi, I'm Dave McDonald with the police department. I'd like to talk to you about Gary Samuels, and he's done some travel here, and I'd really like to talk to you about." And I could tell immediately that something was wrong, and her face was just absolutely ashen when she looked at me. She was on the verge of tears. She said, "I knew you would come. My husband said you would come." 3 o'clock on the 10th of November, 1994, they receive an anonymous call. It's a male caller, and he says to the travel agent, "I just want to confirm that if I purchase that insurance and I'm driving in my car in the province of Ontario and there's an accident and the person named in the policy dies, do you get your 150 grand if you die in your car in the province of Ontario?" And the insurance, or the travel lady says, "I don't think so." Gary Samuels comes in maybe 2 hours later. The manager comes out. He says to her, "Oh, you recognize my voice? That was me on the phone. So let's have this discussion. So if somebody dies in the car, in the province, but they're buying it so they can go out of province, they still get paid, right?" And she says, "Yeah, I think you're right. I think it does say that." Thanks for it. Thank you very much. And by 9 o'clock at night, she was dead in his vehicle in the province of Ontario.
Will the statements from the travel agent give investigators enough evidence to prove premeditated murder? Will McDonald finally be able to arrest Gary Samuels for the cold-blooded murder of his wife? Mounting evidence turns a fatal car accident into a homicide investigation. The victim's husband will collect more than $2 million in life insurance benefits. The investigation uncovers an intricate insurance fraud scheme. It includes a policy that was issued the day before her death. On June 6, 1996, 18 months after Barbara Lanthier's death, Gary Samuels is arrested and formally charged with first-degree murder. During the preliminary inquiries, the investigators decide to revisit the cause of death. For a second opinion, they contact Dr. Chasson, chief pathologist for the province of Ontario.
We ultimately did a full sort of review of the pathology done at the postmortem, and on further review of the x-rays, there was no fracture at C1 and C2. So that was a bit of a red herring.
Dave McDonald asked Dr. Chasson his opinion about the extensive bruising observed on Barbara Lanthier's body.
His expert opinion, based on what he reviewed, was that drowning was a diagnosis of exclusion. So in the end, what we got from both Dr. Wenckebach and then further from Dr. Chason was that simple drowning wasn't indicated here. Dr. Chason also commented on the extent of the head and face injuries and the bony injuries caused to Barbara Lanthier, and his opinion was that they were not consistent with the story as provided by Gary Samuels.
Dr. Chasson's opinion suggests that Barbara Lanthier could have been killed before the accident. The prosecution argues that Gary Samuels' truck was moving too slowly when it entered the river to be a real accident. The defense counters the prosecution can't estimate the speed of the truck because no measurements were taken at the scene.
One of the things we did not do that night, because it was a rescue effort, not a murder investigation at the time, was we did not measure the distance the truck was out in that channel, because they were, far more interested in trying to save that life.
Dave McDonald contacts Cy Kelly, a specialist in the rectification of single-image photography. He has worked for British military intelligence and the U.S. Marines. Kelly can accurately recreate a scene from a photograph so that measurements can be taken.
He took a photograph of the Gary Samuels truck in the river with the bumper facing downstream, and he laid an acetate on top of it. So he scratched the bumper, and he scratched significant points on the rocky cliff that had not changed.
Mr. Kelly builds a pinhole camera that is the same focal length as the camera that took the original photograph from the scene. He mounts the marked acetate to the cardboard camera. The next step is to recreate the photograph that was taken during the event.
We brought the editor of the paper, Jeff McGuire, and his 55mm camera back to the scene, showed him the picture and said, "Where did you stand when you took the pictures?" And he said, "I was right at the end of the guardrail when I took this series."
Mr. Kelly then sets the pinhole camera up at the same position as the original camera.
So what happens then is, when you look through the pinhole at the back of the 55mm deep box and through the acetate that's been fastened to the front, you see the scratches of the cliff, and you can line them up exactly with those parts of the cliff that haven't moved or changed in 4 years.
While viewing the scene through the marked acetate, Kelly is able to see exactly where Samuel's truck laid in the Mississippi River.
He took the bumper off the front of the actual truck, put the divers back in the water, and the first thing he said was flip the bumper upside down. They did that. He got them to raise it 6 inches, move forward, stop, move back, lower that edge, stop. And when he stopped, he let me look through the pinhole, and my goodness, the scratched bumper was exactly over top of the real bumper in real life. And he said, measure it right from there. And we measured the distance from the edge of the bumper to the cliff. It was 2.9 meters. So we knew then exactly how far out the truck was that night.
With these measurements, investigators are able to calculate an accurate estimate of the speed of the truck when it drove over the edge. The preliminary hearing lasts 2 years, from 1997 to the end of 1998. The trial finally opens April 9, 2001, nearly 7 years after the events. After only 8 weeks, the trial ends with the conviction of Gary Samuels.
It was one of the most carefully planned, strategic financial murders I've ever even heard of, frankly. And it was his greed, and the judge said this, Judge Roy on the first trial said this, it was his greed that really gave him away.
The sentence of life in prison without parole for 25 years is announced. Samuel's lawyers immediately begin working to appeal the decision. Gary Samuel's appeal is heard, and a second trial begins 13 years after Barbara Lanthier's death. The second trial lasts 3 months, and the original verdict is upheld. Gary Samuels remained in Kingston Prison, where he died of cancer in 2010. A crime of greed, committed in cold blood. It could have gone unpunished without the determination of the lead investigator. The community of Carlton Place has since regained its tranquility. But the icy waters of the Mississippi River will forever hold the memory of Barbara Lanthier's murder.